In Surah 447, Muhammad, in the name of Allah, warned the people of the book, in this case Jews, those who possessed the law of Moses, the Psalms, and the prophets, of a terrible punishment that was going to befall them if they refused to believe in what Muhammad was now bringing in confirmation of what they already had in their possession. O ye people of the book, believe in what we have now revealed, confirming what was already with you, before we change the face and fame of some of you beyond all recognition, and turn them hindwards, or curse them as we cursed the Sabbath breakers, for the decision of Allah must be carried out. The punishment that this verse speaks of is obviously something the Jews are expected to know about from the previous scriptures, since the author appeals to them as the people of the book, claims that what he's bringing is in confirmation of what they already have, and presupposes that they know what he's talking about when he refers to the face-changing curse of Allah that was brought upon the Sabbath breakers. However, while the Old Testament scriptures do speak of God commanding Jews to observe a day of holy rest on the Sabbath, and do speak of certain people transgressing the command and being punished, such as the man who was stoned for defiantly picking up sticks in order to build a fire on the Sabbath, we never read of any group of people whose faces were cursed and changed beyond all recognition. In other words, what we appear to have here is yet another example of Muhammad mistaking a far-fetched legend of later Talmudic Jews for something that God had previously revealed. The otherwise cryptic reference in Surah 447 to the face-changing curse of Allah is explained in further detail several other times in the Quran. For example, speaking of this curse, Surah 560 tells us that Allah, in good fairy tale fashion, cursed the Jews by transforming them into beasts, namely, apes and swine. Say, shall I point out to you something much worse than this, as judged by the treatment it received from Allah, those who incurred the curse of Allah and his wrath, those of whom some he transformed into apes and swine, those who worshipped evil. These are many times worse in rank and far more astray from the even path.
Allah says, those people that he has cursed, he can turn them into monkeys, apes and swines. Go check Surah Al-Ma'idah. Shafar is not saying that. Chapter 5, verse 60. Allah says that in the Quran.
Another reference to this is found in Surah 2, which makes it clear that this curse pertained to the Jews who transgressed in the matter of the Sabbath, and that Allah intended it to serve as an example to others, such as the Jews at Muhammad's time, who were being threatened with this very thing for not believing in Muhammad and his purported revelations. And well ye knew those amongst you who transgressed in the matter of the Sabbath. We said to them, be ye apes, despised and rejected. So he made it an example to their own time and to their posterity, and a lesson to those who fear Allah.
He turned them into apes and swines, those who did not observe their holy day. Oh yeah.
The fullest description of this non-biblical legend, which sounds more like something in 1001 Arabian Nights, is found in Surah 7, where Allah tells Muhammad to ask the Jews about a town by the sea that transgressed by catching fish on the Sabbath. As the story goes, the fish would only come near to the village on the Sabbath day, and then they would taunt the Jewish fishermen by sticking their heads up out of the water, as if to say, catch us, we dare you. Ask them, the Jews, concerning the town standing close by the sea. Behold, they transgressed in the matter of the Sabbath. For on the day of their Sabbath their fish did come to them, openly holding up their heads. But on the day they had no Sabbath they came not. Thus did we make a trial of them, for they were given to transgression. When some of them said, why do ye preach to a people whom Allah will destroy or visit with a terrible punishment? Said the preachers, to discharge our duty to your Lord, and perchance they may fear him. When they disregarded the warnings that had been given them, we rescued those who forbade evil, but we visited the wrongdoers with a grievous punishment because they were given to transgression. When in their insolence they transgressed all prohibitions, we said to them, Be ye apes, despised and rejected.
Everyone knows this. One of the ways that they were disgraced is that Allah Ta'ala, due to their abstinence and disobedience and their murder of the Anbiya and their shirk and their kufr, Allah changed a group of them into swine and monkeys.
Since this story can't be found in the previous scriptures, where then did it come from? Unfortunately, while we can trace many of Muhammad's ideas back to unbiblical rabbinic traditions, since we don't have a full record of what 7th century Jews were palming off to Muhammad as revelations from God, the best we can do in many cases is make plausible inferences from what we do know. In this case, we do know that this story can't be found in the Bible. We also know that Muhammad had a penchant for mistaking apocryphal Jewish tales for biblical truth. In keeping with this, the Talmudic scholar Rabbi Louis Ginsburg, in his book The Legends of the Jews, makes the following tantalizing suggestion as to how this idea could have arisen among Jews in 7th century Arabia. He writes, according to Tosefta Yebamot 110 and parallel passages in Bavli and Yerushalmi, which refers to the Babylonian and Jerusalem Talmuds, the high priestly family of Caiaphas, from Kaifa, which means ape, hailed from Bet Mechoshesh, the house of the stick-gatherer, in other words, the house of the man who picked up sticks on the Sabbath. In view of the legend, undoubtedly Jewish, found in Quran 260, that Moses transformed the Sabbath breakers into apes, one is inclined to trace some connection between the Caiaphas, apes, and their place of origin, the house of the stick-gatherer, the Mekoshesh being the typical case of the Sabbath breaker. What Rabbi Ginsburg is saying is because Caiaphas, whose name means ape, was believed to have descended from the same house as the man who picked up sticks on the Sabbath day, the legend arose among some Jews that Caiaphas and his house got their name because in some way they were related to a group of Sabbath breakers who were transformed into apes and swines. Well, whatever the exact origin of this tall tale, it's clear that it doesn't come from the Bible, and that this is yet another example of the Jews making a monkey out of Muhammad.
Oh, yeah.
The Quran is full of stories that are an embarrassment to certain Muslims, especially Muslim apologists who have the undesirable task of trying to defend its divine inspiration. The embarrassment here arises both because of where these stories came from and also because of what they say. In the first part of this series, I discussed one of these stories, namely the Jewish fable about a group of Jews who were transformed by Allah into apes and swine because they violated the Sabbath day. Jews had made up this story in order to dissuade people from violating the Sabbath. Apparently, telling them they'd be turned into apes and swine was enough to do the job. Well, because Muhammad didn't know the difference between stories that came from the Bible and stories that were made up later, he ignorantly incorporated this story into the Quran as if it were a revelation from God. Understandably uncomfortable with this story being included in the Quran, Shabir Ally says that it should be taken figuratively rather than be accepted at face value. In fact, Shabir even says that if this story and others like it is understood literally, then the Quran would be guilty of teaching ridiculous nonsense.
It seems to me better to take the less miraculous sort of description or explanation of a thing. Okay. And that is normal. We use all kinds of expressions which, if one were to take them in a very literal sense, would be ridiculous. But when we use these expressions, we expect that the listener will take it in a reasonable sense.
Were it not for the fact that Islam is so inimical to humor, it would be tempting to think that Shabir was here engaging in satire. After all, his show is called
Let the Quran Speak,
which is just to say, let the Quran mean what it says, and not what others want to reinterpret it to mean, so that it doesn't end up looking like ridiculous nonsense. Now, to Shabir's credit, he admits that the vast majority of commentators in the history of Islam have understood this verse to clearly teach that Allah literally transformed people into apes and swine.
Most of the commentators have taken it in a very literal way.
This in itself is a devastating admission. After all, part of the boast found over and over again in the Quran is that the Quran is a clear book. In fact, so clear that it explains everything in exhaustive detail. Verily, those who conceal the clear proofs, evidences, and the guidance which we have sent down, after we have made it clear for the people in the book, they are the ones cursed by Allah and cursed by the cursors. Aleph Lam Ra. This is a book with verses basic or fundamental of established meaning, further explained in detail from one who is wise and well acquainted with all things. What this means is, if the vast majority of Muslim interpreters are wrong and Shabir is right, then the Quran is in error when it claims to be a clear book and exhaustively detailed. On the other hand, if the majority of Muslim interpreters are right and Shabir is wrong, then the Quran contains ridiculous stories. Personally, I'm fine with either option. Well, having already admitted that most Muslims have taken these passages literally, Shabir attempts to gain some credibility or traction for his view by mentioning two lone exceptions, namely Mujahid, a relatively early commentator on the Quran, and Yusuf Ali, a relatively modern commentator on the Quran.
Mujahid, who was one of the early commentators on the Quran, a student of Ibn Abbas, who said that the proper understanding of this is not that people were literally changed into animals, but that they took on some characteristics that one might describe as animalistic. I guess what he had in mind is almost similar to what we have when we say, this guy is a pig. So we don't mean literally he is a pig. We mean that he behaves in a manner that is not refined. And we say that the person eats like a pig or something like this. Yusuf Ali, in his translation of the Quran and in his comments, notes dealing with that, tends to take a more rational stance towards it.
While Mujahid does put forth a view that roughly approximates what Shabir believes, he offers no argument for it, nothing that can be evaluated. And so Mujahid's opinion ends up being nothing more than that, just baseless conjecture. To quote Mujahid, "Their hearts were transformed. That is, they were not transformed into apes. This is but a metaphor coined by God with regard to them, similar to the metaphor of the ass carrying books." Not only does Mujahid not offer any argument for this view, but the comparison he makes to Surah 62:5, which shows that elsewhere Allah uses figures of speech, only makes matters worse. According to the verse, the likeness of those who were entrusted with the obligation of the Torah, that is, to obey its commandments and practice its laws, but who subsequently failed in those obligations, is as the likeness of a donkey which carries huge burdens of books, but understands nothing from them. Notice that this verse twice uses the word likeness. That is, it makes it clear that what we have in this passage is a simile or figure of speech. But that's exactly what we don't find in those passages that speak of Allah turning Sabbath breakers into apes and swine. If Allah wanted to make it clear that he was speaking figuratively in those passages, when he said that he transformed and cursed Jews so they would be apes and swine, then he could have given us the kind of detail that would have made that obvious, like he did in Surah 62:5. Once again, we must conclude that either the Quran is not a clear and sufficiently detailed book like it claims, or, according to the Quran, Allah really did turn certain Jews into apes and swine, which is ridiculous. So much for Shabir's appeal to Mujahid. His appeal to Yusuf Ali isn't any better. First of all, Yusuf Ali did not say, or in any way indicate, that he inclined toward the figurative interpretation. In 3 out of 4 of his comments on this story in the Quran, in Surah 2, Surah 7, and Surah 4, he simply lets these statements of the Quran stand. He simply puts them forth as if he accepts them at face value. In other words, he gives no indication of accepting an allegorical interpretation as the most likely interpretation of the verse. The only time that Yusuf Ali ever does mention this view is in his comment on Surah 560, where he only mentions it as a bare possibility. To quote Yusuf Ali, "Perhaps both apes and swine are allegorical." Second, when Yusuf Ali refers to this view as a possibility, just like Mujahid, he doesn't offer any arguments for it. Perhaps that's because there are no arguments for it, at least none worth mentioning. Third, when Yusuf Ali explains what this passage would mean if taken allegorically, the explanation which he gives, which is the same as that of Mujahid and Shabir Ali, ends up being circular nonsense. Perhaps both apes and swine are allegorical. Those who falsified Allah's scriptures became lawless like apes, and those who succumbed to filth, gluttony, or gross living became like swine. This interpretation is circular nonsense, since it ends up saying that those lawless individuals who broke the Sabbath were cursed to behave lawlessly, and those Jews who engaged in filthy living on the Sabbath were cursed to engage in filthy living. What a waste of a perfectly good curse. Obviously, since they were already lawless according to the Quran, then the curse of Allah has to refer to something else. In other words, it's not figurative. And you know what that means.
If one were to take them in a very literal sense, would be ridiculous.